Ninja Mutant Turtles, and they all had like kung fu and fighting in it, and you know, I think it's moved away a bit from that now because of the way society is, but it's always like had a passion for me, and it's not to go out and just, you know, fight, but like get into a martial art, get into a discipline, and yeah, that's one of the reasons I went into it.
So like obviously you're a published poet, published author. What do you have an interest in like writing and poetry and stuff then, or did that come a bit later?
I've always loved like storytelling, like you know, I'm a bit of a bookworm, and I used to devour books when I was a kid. You know, I'd be reading whatever I can remember. I don't know, I can't remember the name of the author now, but it was about all these mice and rats, and they were all in different kingdoms and stuff. And I can remember reading all of them, and I just loved it. And when we were, I think it was like 8 or 9, we went on an overnight school field trip to a place down the Gower, and one of the things in it was a poetry workshop. I remember writing this poem, giving my teachers, and they all said it was good, and I think it ended up getting published in a paper or something. And yeah, that's the first memory I've got of like writing something and someone saying it was good, and then it's just always sort of been a part of me, probably longer than boxing. One of the other things that kind of like kills Britain a little bit is like in America, each state has got its own athletics commission, so they'll you'll have to have medicals of each state fighting it. So for example, in Florida, you can have an MMA fight one week and fight pro boxing the other week and fight bare knuckle the week after. But because they're run by one athletics commission, if you get injured in one, they know about it, so they suspend your license. You can't compete in any other sport until that suspension. In Britain, because you've got the British Boxing Board, is governed by just them, and MMA isn't governed by anyone, although Safe MMA is trying to do it. They don't speak to each other, so you could get knocked out, and this is why the British Boxing Board won't let you do anything other than boxing. So you could get knocked out in MMA, the week after you could have a pro boxing fight in the LC2, and they walked in, and there was a poster on the wall, and I'm on the poster, and they're like, James Lilley, you've been fighting pro MMA? I said I have, because I used to, years ago, before you had like Sherdog and Tap Lodge, you used to fight under a different name. So
what was your name?
Something like Jamie Lilley, something really close. And when I was trying to get on Cage Wars then, I had to email all these different places and say, oh look, this is me, can you put my record together, because I'm still missing like 2 or 3 fights. They're like, oh James, you've been fighting MMA? I said, I haven't. They said, you have? I said, no, I haven't. I said, they're like, we're looking at a fucking poster with your face on it, this was definitely you. I was like, so they called me in, and I kind of lost my head a little bit with them then.
Hey guys, I'm Si. Welcome to Ace Podcast Nation. Welcome to another episode of My Story here at Eat Sleep Media, and delighted to be joined today by bare knuckle boxing fighter and of course poet. He is Mr. James Lights Out Lilley. How are you, my friend?
I'm good, mate. Thanks for having me on.
Indeed, looking forward to it, mate. I've been looking forward to it. It's obviously we had you on the fight show previously. This one's a bit different. We delve into kind of you a bit more, and obviously on the fight show we talked about like fighting generally and stuff. A bit more about you today, but looking forward to it, mate. Have a nice chat, and like wherever we go, I suppose. We'll see where we end up. But to kind of start us off, I guess, what I like to do is take you like right back to sort of the beginning, your upbringing and that, and like where you're from and all that sort of thing. So if people don't know you and they want to get a feel for you, what was the early days for James Lilley like?
So I grew up. I meant before. I grew up in Townhill in Swansea. It's a decent area. Not the Townhill bit or the Swansea bit.
The Swansea bit.
It's a decent area. I know it has had a bit of a reputation in the early 90s for the car crime and stuff, but you know, it's a great community. They all get behind their own. So I was doing a bit of kung fu when I was younger, just because I like Power Rangers and the old Bruce Lee films, and it kind of petered out a little bit for me when I got to just before comprehensive school or high school, and then I just one day just fancied to go boxing, found that my younger cousin was boxing, so I went up for a look, and then kind of there was no looking back. Like boxing became a big part of my life, you know. I've always seen my sport as more of a hobby than like an actual like be all end all, but it became a massive part of my life, and that was the start of this journey I've been on, which is still continuing 23 years later.
It's a long old time, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Because there's a lot of different fighters that I speak to. They all get into it in, some martial art or sport or boxing or something. Kung Fu, you're the first person who said to me that's where they started, was Kung Fu.
Yeah.
What's the difference between Kung Fu and, I know, karate or something like
that? I don't know the full sort of details of it because I was a kid, but
Yeah.
all I know is the Karate Kid.
Mm-hmm.
It's just they're actually doing Kung Fu in it, but apparently they couldn't call it the Kung Fu Kid because it didn't sound as good as the Karate Kid.
Okay.
But that's the only kind of fact. But yeah, it was simply because there was the Kung Fu Academy was closer to my house than the karate. The karate was down what we call the Gorse, which was a little bit further walk. And being a kid, I was lazy, so I got into Kung Fu. Yeah, I wasn't very good at it. I got to sort of like a junior brown belt level, but I said I think as a kid, you get interest and lose interest really quickly, and it was only until I got into boxing a little bit later that it reignited my passion for sort of combat sports. I think as a kid I was just doing Kung Fu because
something to do almost.
The Power Rangers did it, and Bruce Lee did it, and the Turtles did it. So
Was you big into Bruce Lee when you were little?
Yeah, it's I remember watching some I had an older cousin and he had a box set. I remember watching a few of the films, Big Boss and stuff like that, and
Classics.
yeah, and but when we were younger, all the cartoons we watched, they were all Ninja Mutant Turtles, and they all had Kung Fu and fighting in it, and I think it's moved away a bit from that now because of the way society is, but it's always had a passion for me, and it's not to go out and just fight, but get into a martial art, get into a discipline, and that's one of the reasons I went into it.
Was you any good at any other sports?
No, I'm terrible at every other sport. I love football. I've tried playing, but I'm rubbish. So I managed a couple of football teams because I was rubbish, but
couldn't play.
Yeah, some of my friends who I played football with, if you ask them how good I am at football, they'll get upset because that's how bad it was. I was rubbish.
So, do you like football? You just not very good at it.
Yeah, I'm really passionate about football. I love football. I watch.
Diehard Cardiff fan, obviously.
No, I'm not even a Swans fan. I'm a Liverpool fan, but
that's marginally better.
Yeah, but no, it's I go down and watch the Swans because that was my local team, but it wasn't the team I supported. But as a kid,
the closest team. Now.
Yeah, and I'll watch any football game that's on TV. I love the World Cups, the Europeans. I'll watch pretty much every group game I can, and always got it on my computer at work. And I love football. But then sort of boxing took over. So I kind of it was weird because when I got into boxing when I was 12, 13, I kind of gave up following all of the sports. I was in this bubble and all that mattered to me was boxing. I'd have stacks and stacks of boxing magazines. My mother still got thousands of boxing books that she keeps telling me to go pick up, which I keep saying keep them just in case. It just kind of took over my life, and it was only until I got to about 17, 18 that I started liking football again. Not that I didn't like football, it's just I just didn't.
Yeah, just in a bubble.
Yeah, so there was a long period where I wouldn't watch football. I wouldn't be interested. I couldn't tell you who some players were in that period because I was so into boxing. And then when I got to 16, 17 again, I think it's the social aspect as well. You go to going to the pubs you meet, and even though I wasn't much of a drinker because boxing, but the football be on, it sparked an interest again to me.
Yeah, it's a social thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
What was you like as a teenager? Trouble? Good?
No, that's a good question. So I went to a school outside my area, so it was more of I would say it's seen as a posher school. So I kind of went there. So I was probably seen as a troublemaker in that school because I was this mouthy kid from the rough area.
Yeah.
But I done well in school. went on as far as my A levels before deciding I didn't fancy university. But yeah, no, I'd say I got in trouble a couple of times in school, but I wasn't sort of constantly. You know, I wasn't one of them getting suspended every week, but I think most of it was that I was like just seen as this mouthy kid from downhill.
So did you find it hard to settle in a school which was out of your area? So was you going to a school, like a different school that was so the people who lived like around?
Yeah, and it was because I went to a primary school outside my area. It was kind of a feeder school for the high school. So yeah, so all the people around my area, you know, they went to one school and then the other high school, and I went the other way. And a few of my friends that, you know, was kind of around my area. But yeah, it was only until like I really got into boxing and then got into a bit older, because the boxing gym again was literally at the end of my road, that I started making friends with the people in my area as well. So boxing's like helped me on that social side of things as well. So although I had like friends in school, I probably wouldn't see them as much outside school because they all were, you know, a few miles away and none of us had cars. But it was only when I got a little bit older then, you know, you get different groups of mates then.
So like obviously you're a published poet, published author. What did you have an interest in like writing and poetry and stuff then, or did that come a bit later?
I've always loved like storytelling. Like you know, I'm a bit of a bookworm, and I used to devour books when I was a kid. You know, I'd be reading whatever I can remember. I don't know, I can't remember the name of the author now, but it was about all these mice and rats, and they were all in different kingdoms and stuff. And I can remember reading all of them, and I just loved it. And when we were, I think it was like 8 or 9, we went on an overnight school field trip to a place down the Gower. And one of the things in it was a poetry workshop. I can remember writing this poem, giving my teachers, and they all said it was good, and I think it ended up getting published in a paper or something. And yeah, that's the first memory I've got of like writing something and someone saying it was good, and then it's just always sort of been a part of me, probably longer than boxing.
Yeah, so this thing's here, right, with kids today, like I got 3 teenage boys, the youngest is 13, the oldest is 17, right, and when they were younger, or the older one particularly, when he was younger, he used to love reading books, and I was the same. I used to just read so many books when I was like a teenager, because you didn't have internet then, so I had like a TV in my room with 4 channels, so when you were in at night and that, and it was time to chill out and that, reading books was what you did, because there was nothing else to really do. Whereas these days, because they got phones and tablets and everything, and there's one thing which I get frustrated with is like none of them really read a lot of books now, even though they, you know, the age they're at, they could devour a load of them, and I'm trying to get them to kind of get back into it and stuff. But like the younger one used to, like, he even probably till the last year of primary school was like, he would happily lay in his bed, and we used to read like Goosebumps or something, and like one of the interlinking series, like, so they all link up, but they're like separate stories, but like there's bits within it, and then it like interlinks into one overarching story, basically to get you to buy like 15 books. But like even at like year 6 or whatever, would happily sit there while I would read it to him, but he wouldn't sit and read it to himself to finish the series, if that makes sense.
I've got you, yeah.
It's mad, like, but yeah, I was the same. I used to enjoy like reading books and that. Well, and so when you got into boxing and that, was there a particular boxer which you followed, or particular boxers that you sort of was looking up to, or was it more just a personal sort of hobby type thing?
Yeah, it was like a personal hobby, but like once I got, like, I'm quite a passionate person, so when I'm involved in it, like, I like to find out lots about the sport. And when I started boxing, like the main guy at the time was Lennox Lewis. And like everyone else in the gym around me, they all like Mike Tyson, because but when I got into boxing, like Lennox Lewis was at the top of his game, so I followed his career from sort of like 2000 on, and he was my favourite boxer at the time because, you know, he was the main guy. And I can remember, I think he signed this massive fight deal. I think it was with BBC, and his first fight was against Hassine Rackman in South Africa when he got knocked out.
That's right.
I can remember staying up in my uncle's house with my cousin who was boxing at the time as well, and my father and my brother, and just watching like Lennox Lewis get knocked out, and I was like, what's going on here? Because I hadn't realised, you know, he was my hero. He was like, he was indestructible, and I know he'd lost early in his career, but I had never had it where I followed someone, and it was probably because, you know, I wasn't into football at the time, where you see your, you know, like, you see your team get beaten by, so, and I remember it was like a weird feeling, because I was just like, whoa, what's just happened? And and that taught me a lot about boxing, you know, is to like expect the unexpected, really.
It's it's a weird thing, isn't it? Because like as a kid, your heroes, you almost, particularly in boxing and fighting, if they're like unbeaten for years and years and years, you kind of don't even expect them to lose. You just always expected them to keep going and going, and then when it doesn't happen, it's a bit of a jolt to the system, isn't it?
Yeah, it was like, it was totally unexpected, and then, you know, from there then it just grew up, and Lennox Lewis was the main one. As I got a little bit older then, you know, I like Mayweather, a fighter he beat, Corrales, and you know, I wouldn't say I got any favourite boxers now at the time, you know, I just love boxing, and same as MMA, bare knuckle. Yeah, it's just, I followed quite a lot then, as you said, I started devouring, obviously Joe Calzaghe, you know, started devouring like magazines and books and found out as much as I could.
So, did you had like a stint in MMA, didn't you, to a certain degree? Like, when did you kind of make that decision to give that a go, and also then make the decision to switch back as well?
I turned pro quite early with the boxing. I turned pro when I was like 19, and I think a couple of years later, pro boxing's changed a lot within the last, you know, 15, 16 years, from the way it was then to the way it is now, especially in Wales. Wales has got more, better promoters now, better run shows,
100%.
and they got more of a better infrastructure for boxing. You know, I think it's because you've got people like, you know, Lee Selby, like Liam Williams, and others, Joe Cordina, and because of them, it's helped pull boxing from where it was. And but I you know, I was waiting around for fights for ages because I didn't have a big manager, and you know, I wasn't like any sort of superstar. I can always remember I was just waiting around for fights for ages and ages. And this guy I grew up with, John Phillips, he'd had his first cage fight, so I started training with him. So we were doing like MMA style training, and I could feel like a difference in my fitness already, because you know, boxing is usually boxing or circus, but with MMA it's kind of like body weight, and I was doing all these
different muscles.
Yeah, exactly. And I was doing all these different this training with him, and I can remember him saying to me, he was like, "Oh, why didn't you have a cage fight then?" And I was like, "Joel, I'm not having a cage fight," because the only thing I'd ever seen of cage fighting, like at the top level, was a show on Bravo called like America's Toughest Men.
Yeah.
And there was like these hillbillies fighting in this old style cage.
Just like a battered
cage.
And
it was like UFC 1, where they were just going in, and I was like, I'm not doing that, you crazy. But as time wore on then, I was doing more and more training with him. I thought, why not? So I went grappling a couple of times, and then he started running his own shows. And I said I was in a bit of a lull with boxing, and with me, I like to be active, I like to fight. You know, a fight's a fight for me. It doesn't matter if it's boxing or MMA. So I just said, yeah, I'll have a go. And then I had a load of MMA fights. Went back to boxing, had a load of MMA fights.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Was it frustrating with the boxing then? Because you seems like that was what you wanted to do, but you just couldn't quite get a break or the chances that you wanted.
Yeah, I find, so like boxing, you know.
Yeah, I know it's a different game now, boxing, isn't it?
Yeah,
especially in Wales.
Exactly. I think you've got more support with the different managers and promoters. And I just kind of lost a passion for it, really. You know, I just felt I was waiting around for fights. Then I would take fights on the road, and if it was a close fight, it would still go home. Yeah. So I kind of lost like a love for it. No, I still, you know, I'm just happy to be a fan now. But
do you know, I wonder about that all the time. Like we speak about it on the fight show all the time with Ben and with Danny, like about boxing, because there is this thing of. Particularly on the like not the biggest shows, but like the sort of decent shows, but not the top shows, where the away fighter has to do so much to win a fight on points. Like you look at the Canelo fight the other day against Bivol.
Yeah.
Like Bivol literally had to beat him so convincingly that if the judges had given it to Canelo, they would have been like a riot.
Yeah,
because it like, and then Ben always says there's like a thing within boxing circles which says you start 4 rounds down against Canelo anyway, and then it's up to you to kind of either finish the fight or get those 4 back, which is, it shouldn't be like that. But my question was going to be, if you're a young pro who's going and he just wants to fight, so you'll try, if you want to, if you get a call and say you fight in Liverpool or you fight in Manchester or wherever, and then you go and you have a good old battle and you think you've won, or even a good performance but it's gone to the card, and they always give it to the home fighter, it's got to be demoralising. It's got to be like, what's the point? Like, I'm losing money to come up here because you don't pay me enough. And it's like...
Yeah, I think the way boxing is structured, I think it needs an overhaul. It is getting better because of the looming... you got MMA, which is like hot on its heels. So I think it's getting better, but you can go to some local shows and you'll have 7 hometown fighters fighting 7 journeymen.
Yeah.
It's costing you 50 quid a ticket, and you could predict every single one of those matches of what the result's going to be, because it's for some reason in boxing they seem to have to want to build a record early.
Yeah, they pad the records out a bit.
They do it with people who've been in the Olympics as well. They'll throw them in against these journeymen when they don't need to. The guys who fought in the Olympics, they have fought
technically good fighters.
Yeah, the best
They've
fighters.
already fought good fighters.
And I don't know what it is about boxing. They seem to have this massive thing about preserving that. Like you look at MMA, some of the top guys have got 10, 15 losses, and no one cares about those losses because of their wins. Yeah. Like Jorge Masvidal, he's one of the biggest names in MMA. He's like one of the money man. He's got 15 losses on his record.
Yeah.
Nate Diaz, 11 losses on his record. No one cares about that. They care about the win, and you just keep going. So I'd like to say that there's going to be a switch, but because there's so much money in boxing and the way it's structured, it's hard to break out with that, and it works for boxing. Don't get me wrong.
I think. Excuse me. Sorry. I think there's there's been a slight change, I reckon, in the last maybe 5-10 years, only because, and I would say particularly in Wales, I think Wales is almost leading the way a little bit in the UK in terms of boxing has had to adapt in Wales because they were losing kids to MMA.
Yeah.
Because I had Gary Lockett in here a few weeks back, and he was like, he couldn't believe that when Richard Shaw done the Cage Warriors Academy shows, which is not even the biggest names really, it's the up and coming names, they were sold out. Like 8, 9, 10,000 people, whereas boxers have got you see them on Facebook, some of the biggest young boxers in Wales, they've really got to push their tickets out, because the way that they're going to get pushed to the next level for their next fight is by the amount of tickets they sell. Not necessarily, it is partly by their performance, but it's also if they can sell tickets. And to me that's frustrating, but I do think Wales has got better with the boxing. Like that Sangagar events has been doing some really good shows in Cardiff and Swansea. There's one in Swansea on Saturday.
That's right, yeah.
Lloyd Germain's fighting, who I had in the week before last.
He's fighting for a Welsh title, is that right?
Yeah.
Who was he fighting? Can you remember?
Tinkler.
That's it, Jake Tinkler, that's it, yeah.
I think they've fought before. I think they fought in the amateurs, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I'm sure there's another couple of fights on.
I think there's another Welsh title fight, and there's a Celtic title between Scottish guy.
Morgan Jones and I can't remember his name. I think he's defending his middleweight title or super middleweight title. I can't remember which one. Yeah, it's a decent card, but said that I don't want to slag boxing off too much, but the British Boxing Board are a big problem because they're set in their ways. Like for example, in Wales, in my gym in the warehouse in Swansea, they do white collar boxing. Okay, so they do guys who never fought put them through a 12-week training camp. And I've had a table at every one of those shows because it's such a good night. You've got people swinging Sweet Carolina, You know, we don't even know. I booked a table for the Auger show. I don't know anyone fighting since then. A couple of my mates have signed up, but it was such a good night. And Chris Ware, who runs the gym, me and him spoke about when we were pros. If you'd had a pro show like that, where people are just coming for the event, and then the fighters can sell tickets after, you know, people are going there just to have a good time. And if you had that in pro boxing, you'd have sold out shows every week.
Yeah.
Because it's just the atmosphere. Sorry, mate. I don't know if it's my missus keeps trying to ring me. Oh, that's all right.
It's one of them things, isn't it, whereby you're trying to, like, the fighters are trying to sell the tickets because they know if the promoters, like, so if you've got a fighter A, I don't want to name anyone particularly because it's not fair on them.
No, of course, yeah.
There's certain fighters who sell a lot of tickets. There's other fighters who maybe don't struggle. They struggle to sell as many tickets, not because they're worse fighters or they've got less fans. It's just their fans might be less able to get to wherever or whatever. You know, it could be anything, kind of. Someone could have a bigger family, whatever it may be. But like, I think what Welsh boxing has done well is adjusted to the fact that Welsh MMA, like there's a list of guys in Welsh MMA at the moment who are like, you know, if they carry on with the trajectory that they've got, could end up being big things. And like, when you speak to like Richard Shaw and people like that, like he's more excited or as excited about the next batch of kids who are coming through who are only like 16, 17 now. And it's like, boxing can't sleep on that.
No, exactly.
And if you take it out to the UK as a whole, you've got Paddy the Baddie and Molly McCann now, who, alright, I don't think Molly McCann's the greatest fighter, but what she's got is she's got guts. She likes to have she has entertaining fights. She's got a personality which people seem to enjoy, and she trains with Paddy. They both out in America now with Dana White, and it's like, if they keep winning or even if they lose, if they keep having entertaining fights and their personalities go the way they are, they're just going to get bigger. So you're going to have like people. I know people say, and I don't want to like exaggerate, I really like Paddy. He's such a sound guy. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's really sound. Like, he's not like what you expect him to be from his interviews. Like, he's not as like, I don't know, obnoxious, I suppose is the right word. He's a really cool dude, like, and but if he keeps getting bigger and keeps winning and gets titles in the UFC and stuff, that's another big name. Then you've got like Jack Shaw's undefeated. You've got Jordan Vucinic in Cage Warriors, who looks he'll probably be in the next UFC London, I think, because he's just so good. And then, you know, there's another few names, by the way, all around the country, and it's like, if they all go to the UFC or Bellator and they all become champions, even Brett now, I think if Brett wins that fight in Ireland in a few weeks, I think there's a good chance he'll be in the mix for the next like bantamweight title fight. And like, if all those names in MMA keep growing and boxing stays stagnant, you lose another generation of kids to MMA.
Yeah.
Because when they got the choice of, should I go to boxing club or should I go to MMA? Well, I want to be like Jack Shaw. I want to be like Jordan Vucinic or Paddy the Baddie or whatever. And I think you can't sleep on that, because MMA is getting bigger and bigger. It's so accessible now to watch. Even if you haven't got BT Sport, if you're a kid and you haven't got BT Sport, if you know Paddy the Baddie is from TikTok, and then you can watch clips on TikTok and YouTube and that. So like, kids know who he is. So as those kids become 16, 17, 18, if they don't train themselves, they'll watch it and they become fans. And then I do think boxing generally is like, it's almost arrogant to it, and it just thinks, oh yeah, we'll be around forever. We don't need to change anything. We've been doing this for years and years. We don't need to change anything. But it's like, well, you do need to change stuff, because you've got fighters like yourself, I know it was a while ago now, who were turned pro, but either couldn't get fights, or when they did get fights, and if the fight's close, you didn't really feel like it's fair. That's a problem within the sport. But that goes all the way from, you know, a 19-year-old pro to a Canelo fight, one of the biggest fights in the world.
One of the other things that's kind of like kills Britain a little bit is like in America, each state has got its own athletics commission. So
course, yeah.
they'll you'll have to have medicals of each state to fight in it. So for example, in Florida, you can have an MMA fight one week and fight pro boxing the other week, and fight bare knuckle the week after. But because they're run by one athletics commission, if you get injured in one, they know about it. So they suspend your license. You can't compete in any other sport until that suspension. In Britain, because you've got the British Boxing Board, is governed by just them, and MMA isn't governed by anyone, although Safe MMA is trying to do it, they don't speak to each other. So you could get knocked out, and this is why the British Boxing Board won't let you do anything other than boxing. So you could get knocked out in MMA, the week after you could have a pro boxing fight, and the British Boxing Board, because they've got no communication with MMA, they won't know you get suspended, and that's why people then are having to make a choice between the sports. Whereas in America, I know a guy, I was speaking to him in the change room, and he just had a bare knuckle fight, and he said, I'm going to fight pro boxing next month, and I was like, you know, he wasn't injured or anything, so he was going to get cleared, and that's what you can do in America. And I think that's the only thing the British Boxing will need to kind of take on board, is to think, right, these guys want to do both sports, let's let them do it rather than making a thing. And they could have...
Do it safely, innit?
Yeah, they could, you know, there's no reason why the British Boxing Board of Control doesn't just have, like, someone from Safe MMA sitting on the board saying, listen, these guys got knocked out last week, don't let them fight for 28 days, and then that's what they tell them. But
it's 100%. There's a guy we had on the fight show. His name's Josh. I forget his surname. Reichart, and he's an amateur fighter in America. And we had him on the time we had Graham Boylan on. So we had Josh on because Graham couldn't come on until a bit later. And Josh fights kickboxing, MMA, and something else. I can't remember what it was. But I think it might be boxing, it might be bare knuckle, I don't know. But he does 3, and he literally, I see his Facebook, he'll be like, I got a kickboxing fight this week. He does it, and then 2 weeks later he's like, I'm doing MMA. And it's like, yeah, it's amazing for him because he's able to hone his skills.
Yeah.
I think ultimately he wants to do MMA, but like his skills have been improving all round because he's fighting kickboxing, he's doing grappling, he's doing wrestling, and he's doing it all at a very, very high level in his state. But if he gets knocked out in kickboxing, he ain't doing the MMA fight. 2 weeks later or
exactly.
Whatever. And it's not complicated to do.
No.
Like, do you know what I mean? When we had Graham Boylan on, actually, on that subject, he went on a little bit of a rant, he did. And look, I was so happy to have him on because he didn't do much press. Certainly doesn't do much press with a channel my size.
No.
And he gave us his time, and he had a little rant about Safe MMA because he said we're the only company in Europe, MMA company, who uses it. And it's like, that's not right, is it?
Yeah.
Because so for people who don't know, Safe MMA is basically, you have to have like a full like brain scans and all that sort of thing, isn't it? So like,
yeah, it's the same as
heart scans, things where...
Yeah, it's the same as going through your boxing medical. So it's like brain scan, eye test, blood test, you know, and it's the same. But I think the problem with like MMA is, again, because they're not run by like a boxing board, there's no one to say, right, you can't put the show on. And the smaller shows then can't afford...
Yeah.
And then say, for example, me and you both had our medicals done, you get injured, and I've sold 20 tables, then they're going to have to replace you with someone. But if there's no one available who's got Safe MMA, then they're going to have to bring someone else who might not be as high caliber, but this fighter sold half your show. So if he doesn't fight, you're losing. So I can understand Graham's frustration, but at the minute I don't think MMA has switched over enough. It's not big enough for the smaller shows yet, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that fully. And I think his thing is like fighter safety in it, and I get that. Yeah. But you're right, like if you're putting on a smaller show, it's not as easy as just saying, right, Will, you've all got to get it. But like, so in Cage Warriors, you have to get it to be allowed to fight. But then Cage Warriors is on UFC Fight Pass, and it's like you said about losses, mate. Like something like MMA, like fighters have got losses. You look at the Cage Warriors card this weekend. It's literally like the best versus the best all the time. Like Jordan fought Paul Hughes the other month, or like last year or whatever. Like, there's no padding your record out. It's literally the best outside of the UFC fighting each other, So it's boxing. I think needs to adapt a little bit, but I would like to see MMA and boxing in the UK come together a little bit, even if they just create some sort of boards between them and kickboxing, and just something which can generally oversee fighter licenses. You just say, right, if you want to fight in boxing, MMA, kickboxing, whatever, you've got to have a license and you've got to be okayed for a fight. And then
I think the sad thing is the same regards. It's only going to happen if someone gets seriously injured in MMA and then they're like, right, okay, did he have his medicals? And like, no.
Yeah.
Well, why didn't he have this? Well, we don't require it. It's only going to happen, and then that's going to be like, you shouldn't be doing that. That's putting out a fire. You should be stopping the fire starting. You know what I mean?
Of course, yeah. Get it done before someone gets hurt.
Yeah.
So do you know with like when you, so say you know when you first turned pro boxing and you were struggling to get a fight, could you at that point go and do an MMA fight and then go back to boxing?
Well, I got suspended by the British Boxing Board because they found out I was fighting MMA.
Right, okay.
So I fought in the...
That must have been an interesting conversation.
It was a very interesting conversation. I fought, funny enough, I was in the LC2. So, and I fought MMA in the LC2, and I used the money from the... I'm ringing something in my pocket.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that happened. Sorry.
It's all right.
Okay, yeah, so, take two. So, I fought MMA in the LC2 because I was between jobs. I wasn't between jobs, actually. I was in a shitty job and I couldn't afford to pay for my boxing medicals because the promoters didn't. So I fought MMA on my friend's show, Budo. And then I went in and got my boxing license out of that money and fought boxing in the Bramham Hall. So then the week after, or a month later, they put on a boxing show in in the LC2, and they walked in and there was a poster on the wall and I'm on the poster and they're like, James Lilley, you've been fighting pro MMA? I said I have, because I used to, years ago, before you had like Sherdog and Tapwad, you used to fight under a different name. So
okay.
and,
what was your name?
Something like Jamie Lilley, something really close. And when I was trying to get on Cage Wars, then I had to email all these different places and say, oh look, this is me, can you put my record together, because I'm still missing like 2 or 3 fights.
Yeah.
They're like, oh James, you've been fighting MMA? I said I haven't. They said, you have? I said, no, I haven't. I said, they're like, we're looking at a fucking poster with your face on it. This was definitely you. I was like, So they called me in, and I kind of lost my head a little bit with them then. I was like, oh, no, I'm not bothering going in. I said, I don't get paid enough in boxing. I'm not a superstar. I just enjoy fighting. So I stayed in MMA. And then I got into bare knuckle. And then a couple of years later, I was still sparring boxing guys, and I kind of got an inkling to go back to boxing. So I thought, right, I'm going to put myself back in for my license. We'll see what they say. So I went up in front of the boxing board, and they're like, if you ever fight bare knuckle or MMA again, you'll be banned for life from the sport of boxing in the UK. I was like, right, okay sir, I'm sorry. And then I got offered a fight in the Vale Arena, but I had to sell X amount of tickets. It was going to be against like a journeyman, just to get my win back in, and then I was offered a Welsh title fight. And then John Wayne Hibbert signed for BKB, and I knew John Wayne Hibbert from watching him on TV. He had the WBC International belt, and BKB phoned me up and they said, do you want to fight John Wayne Hibbert? So I was like, yeah. Rung the British Boxing Board. I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to withdraw my application for my license. I said, I'm going to stick to bare knuckle, and that was it then. So yeah, so that was me done with boxing, and I think I kind of made the right choice, because bare knuckle is a growing sport at the moment. It's not as big as MMA or boxing, but I'm in the ground floor. So, I'm, in 10 years' time, if the sport does grow, people look back and they'll be like, oh, this is, James Lilley. He was one of the first pioneers, So
yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and seemed to be pretty good at it. So
yeah. That's the thing, isn't it? Like, I think when it kind of, a few years ago when you first heard like bare knuckle boxing, everyone was a bit like, oh, don't know about that. But like when you actually watched it then and what it wasn't quite as. It's the same as when people say cage fighters, isn't it? Certainly 10, 15 years ago when you heard cage fighter, you assumed like the hillbillies fighting in there, like the broken cages and that, and you assume it's like bare knuckle boxing in like a what's called like a slaughterhouse or something like you see on a film, or in,
Yeah, it's
what's called snatch, isn't it?
yeah, it's like you said, like they used the word cage fighter years ago just to get people interested in, like, oh, cage fighter must be like gladiators and stuff.
Yeah.
But now you speak to like the MMA guys who were
I
around.
don't like it.
You say cage fight, and you can see them sort of winching because they don't like that word, because that was a word they used because they had to get it off the ground floor, and now it's mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
And although you can't rebrand bare knuckle boxing or bare knuckle fighting, I still kind of wince when, like, if I'm in work and someone's like, oh, this is James, he's a professional fighter. Oh, what sport do you do? And I'm like, oh, boxing. Oh, for who? Bare knuckle boxing. And they look at me and I'm like, listen, it's not what you think it is. Like, because
Yeah. You feel like you got to explain all the time.
I told one of the guys who I knew in my MMA gym, I was down a show in Tenby. He's like, you're doing bare knuckle boxing now? Because they called me up to the cage to say about my fight. And I was like, yeah. He's like, oh, where is it then? Do they like text you a secret location and you go to a car park? I was like, no, it's in the O2. And he's like, oh, right.
It's on TV.
He's like, it's on TV. I said, there's like, and that's what people, I think, you know, people have got the grips with cage fighting now, or cage fighting, I've done it now, with MMA. And I think they'll end up getting the grips with...
I think it's slowly happening with the bare knuckle though.
Yeah.
I think people are more and more on board, and I think it's helped. Like some big names have signed and done fights. Like Brad Pickett did a fight, didn't he? And
Yeah.
And obviously you got like Paige Van Zandt, and one of the other women done. What was her name? I don't know. One of the other UFC women did one.
Oh, Rachel Ostrovich, is it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a few like big UFC names who floated over because they've finished their UFC career contracts, or they've been released or whatever, and it's like, do I go to Bellator, or do I, and it's obviously the BKFC are obviously offer them more money or better fights or whatever, and
yeah, it's growing. You know, it's really exciting to be a part of. I'm happy I've signed now, because I think in 6 months' time it's going to be hard to get into BKFC because they're blown up bigger and.
Well, I remember I watched the show. I can't remember. It might have even been the one that Brad Pickett was on, and I watched it for him. I think it was him. I watched it for a particular fighter, and overall, I thought the show. This was probably 3 years ago, and I think overall the show was all right. I watched it for the fighter I was looking for. It was good, but then when I watched the one that you was on a few weeks back, the difference in everything in that 2-3 years is massive, right down to the quality of the fights, the fitness of the fighters, the condition of the fighters, the presentation of it as well, like the commentary and the quality of the camera work. Everything has gone up massively. And you always know if a company's growing, like, because the quality gets better, because as they're growing, they're expanding, they're adapting. What was your experience like? Because you obviously went out to America for your last fight. What was that like?
It was amazing.
Did you know for a while that you were going out to America for your next fight?
Well, I'd spoken to BKFC a few years ago when they were not as big then. I was interested in going out. I would never say it was a goal of mine to go fight in America, but all the fighters I grew up watching were all fighting in America. Yeah. So if it got offered to me, and now BKB out in America doing the collab shows with BYB, so but I didn't know that was happening at the time, and I got offered a contract with BKFC, so I left BKB, went to BKFC, and I was waiting around for ages because we just come out of COVID. There was still like loads of restrictions in place. You couldn't fly. You'd have to go isolate for 2 weeks in a country outside of Britain, and I just thought, right, you know what?
There's so much hassle. That
it was a pain, and I was like, I've signed for this company now. It's not going to happen, and that's why I booked to fight that MMA show when I spoke to you guys last time. And I was sitting in Peterborough in the restaurant with the guy I work with. I had a pint in my hand, and my phone went and said, "James, you got a fight offer." And I was like, "All right, we've heard this before." Within an hour, I had a fight contract through, put on a sweatsuit because I always carry a training kit with me, and I was running through Peterborough at 6 o'clock in the morning then to get the weight off and stuff. So, yeah, and then they said, "Oh, it's going to be in Fort Lauderdale, just outside Miami," and I was like, until I got on the plane, I was still like, "Oh, this is never going to happen."
Yeah.
You know? And you kind of don't think of the situation when you're in training camps. Like, everyone's like, "Oh, you know, the fight's 8 weeks away, it's not a long time," but because you've got like you train 6 days a week, so what's, twice a day, whatever that is, times
So a
8.
lot of sessions.
It's a lot of sessions, so I'm never thinking about the fight. I'm never thinking about my opponent. All I'm thinking about is, I got to get up at 4:30 in the morning tomorrow to train at 5. I got to go back to the gym after work, and that's all I'm thinking about. And then you work to your rest day, and you're like, and you just think about your rest day. And then maybe on your rest day, you start thinking about all the stuff you got to do. But like until we got to the airport, I didn't really. I was like, shit, we're going to America, and I hadn't flown for 3 years because of COVID. I'd had like 2 holidays cancelled. I haven't been on a long haul flight for sort of 10, 12 years, so it was just a whole surreal experience. And I think